Hello everyone, thank you for joining this session on migration, environment and climate change. The session is organized by the Dynamics Department of the Institut Convergence Migration. This is the department I lead. I am Lisa Chauvet, Professor of Economics at University Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne, and the Dynamics Department is co-led by Audrey Lenoël, who is a researcher in sociology and who did a lot to prepare this session. So I take this opportunity to thank her. So why did we choose to organize a session on that topic, migration, environment, and climate change? Two reasons for that. First, the impact of climate change and environment degradation is already a major challenge in developing countries, and notably in the poorest rural areas of developing countries, and it is unfortunately likely to become more and more prominent. Migration as a coping strategy for households is one of the key consequences of climatic crisis, and it will have repercussions first locally within countries, because people move first within their own country, but also regionally for neighboring countries, and sometimes as well globally. And so this issue will call for public policies that will need to address coordination issues at various spatial levels. The second reason for choosing this topic is that the Dynamics Department is quite active in this research question. The Dynamics Department gathers researchers from various fields, going from demography to geography, economics, sociology, to cite just a few. And not all of our researchers, but most of them, have in common to use rather quantitative approaches to address the research questions they are dealing with. So the question we mostly address at the Dynamics departments relate to demographic, economic, and environmental dynamics of migration, and more generally relate to migration, development, and the globalization process. So before providing detailed information on our four presenters, let me quickly explain how the session is organized. First, we will have a presentation by Laurie Hunter, who will overview the migration environment research literature and highlight the remaining puzzles and promising approaches. Then we will have three presentations, all of them on the impact of climate change on migration, and notably on the decision to live by households. Each of these address this issue at a different level of analysis. First, Flor Guber works at a rather meso level, at the locality level on Malian localities. Then we have Paivi Lujala, who will present a work at an even more micro level in Bangladesh. And finally, Catherine Millock, who will adopt a more macro perspective to study how irrigation can dampen the effect of climate change on migration. So before we start, let me thank the four of them for agreeing to participate to this session. We are very happy to welcome them, all of them today. So I'm going to give the floor to Laurie Hunter, who is a professor of sociology at the University of Colorado Boulder, where she is also director of the CU Population Center in the Institute of Behavioral Science. She is also a member of the US National Academy of Science Board on Environment and Society. She is an environmental demographer studying migration-environment connections in various contexts, such as Mexico or South Africa. Laurie, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Lisa, and bonjour, everyone. Let me say, first of all, thank you so much for this invitation. I really appreciate it, and I'm honored. It's always a delight for me to think back on migration environment research and consider where we've been and where we're going. So again, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup for the opportunity. So as Lisa mentioned, I will talk today, I will provide a general overview. I hope it's useful. And then also think about remaining puzzles and promising approaches. So here's the outline for the next few minutes. I'll talk first about the body of scholarship, sort of what it is and how it developed. And then again, look at puzzles, approaches, and conclude. So first, let's start with our little timeline. And again, it was really interesting to think back on this body of scholarship. I'll say way back in the dark ages of the late 1990s, my own dissertation was on migration and environment, but it was within the context of the US. And I looked at sort of environmental pollution as a push factor and amenities as a pull factor. And I look back at that now and realize how simple it was and how much has emerged since then. So it's like I said, it's been a delight to watch it happen. 1992, I'll start with Richard Bilsborough published this piece in the European Journal of Population. And it was really novel. And it was really simple. So all he did was link population growth to land use change using a bivariate chart. But nothing like that had really been done before. Let me say, too, I'm speaking from a demographic perspective. I'm a population scientist, so this is the work with which I'm most familiar. Graham Hugo, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Graham or Graham's work. He put forward this continuum in 1996, which thought about, and again, it was really novel at the time, the ways in which some movement related to the environment is voluntary. Think about amenities and how people might be pulled towards those, as opposed to forced movement, right, where hurricanes or typhoons displace individuals who really have no choice. So in the late 1990s, early 2000s, there was some really alarmist calls about climate refugees. We continue to see some of this today, but that was when it really showed up. Norman Mayer's piece was in the late 90s, and even the UN got on board and put forward some projections related to climate refugees. And as this says, the UN was embarrassed by their forecast. These took a really simplistic look at migration and didn't dive into the complexity, the kinds of things that the research community knows really shape migration and shape the ways in which climate will influence migration. Let me give you another example of how new this work is. I've done some writing for the Population Reference Bureau. They're based in DC and they're a great outreach organization. And they asked me back in 2007 to put together a piece on climate and migration. And I was really torn because I looked out at the literature and really couldn't find anything that was peer reviewed at the time. And I didn't feel comfortable writing a piece that didn't have peer reviewed scientific literature underneath it. So it was really more of a thought piece, but that was 2007. And when I went to the databases to look for research on migration and environment, I found all sorts of work on birds. So the ecologists really had us, we're way before us on this. But we've done a really good job. So the research community, I think, came together and, we have a body of work on migration. We have a body of work on vulnerability. There's another body of work on natural capitals and livelihoods. And people really started sort of thinking about where do those intersect and how can they help us understand the ways in which migration may be influenced by environmental change. So again, just to give you an indication of how new this is, in 2010 or 2009, I put out a call for a special issue of migration, of population and environment on migration and the environment. So that was 2009. And I didn't get a lot. I was editor of the journal at the time. But I beat the bushes and we came up with a few, and I was really excited that they started sort of contributing to the body of work that has since emerged. A publication in Nepal led by Doug Massey, Amazon, Luke Perry, and this was Guatemala, Jason Davis and David Lopez Carr. So that's just a short summary of where I think some of the motivations came from. I really think that the migration research community really stepped up when those alarmist calls were put forward and showed us that this is all much more complex than originally considered. So let me summarize what I see as some of the findings. Again, case studies emerged from all over the globe. Now, this is in the last decade for the most part, and really built on that early framework provided by Hugo. I'll put some what I think are summary statements, and these aren't only mine. They also come from different research summaries that I'll show at the end. But in the yellowish orange is what I think is a sort of a thematic conclusion, and then I provide you some citations below that really range from the beginning of this work up until towards the end. You can see Finley's work in '94 up to Yasmina's just a year and a half ago. So a general finding, I think, in some regions, drier areas exhibit higher levels of outmigration. So the environment serving as a push factor, if you will. And related to that, less natural capital is sometimes associated with greater outmigration. What I mean by that is things like, as opposed to thinking about just rainfall or, those kinds of direct impacts, natural capital would be more like the natural resources that households may be dependent on. My work, some of my work is in rural South Africa, where households make really daily use of the communal landscapes around them for dietary needs, for medicinal purposes, fodder for livestock, and also resources to create goods that they then sell for income generation. So natural capital, sometimes when that becomes more scarce, you can also see migration as a consequence. And as opposed to much of the early alarmist literature on climate refugees and people crossing borders, a lot of environmentally induced migration is internal. And that work has shown up in different contexts across the globe. And the World Bank put out a really thorough piece, Groundswell, it was called, just 2 years ago, that really tries to model internal migration as related to climate. So I'd recommend that to any of you who are interested in an overview. And in fact, international migration is sometimes associated with more natural capital. Those big moves across boundaries take resources. So sometimes it's the households who have the most resources, be it in the form of environmental resources or what, are more able to step into that expensive international migration. And then a lot of work is showing the importance of social capital, or the networks that individuals have or households have to potential destination places. Again, some of my own work, this work in Mexico, has found that there is movement from Mexico to the US when things get drier, so in rainfall deficits or droughts, but that happens mostly from places that already have strong migration streams to the US. So that social capital is really important. Environmental pressures come in all sorts of forms, and they intersect, right? So in early work, people may have looked at just drought or just this or just that, but all of these things combine in ways that are really important. I'll actually include this as sort of one of the puzzles that I talk about towards the end of the talk. And then environmental push factors intertwine with economic and other factors to shape vulnerability. And I think this is the last one. In rural households, migration is but one component of a variety of adaptive livelihood strategies. And that's really important, because I think in early work, people assume that migration, not just people, researchers and policy thought that migration, was the primary and most desirable adaptive strategy. But actually, most people want to stay in place. So work has really shown us that. So again, going back to Hugo's relatively simple framework, I put up this new framework to show how far we've come. And this was 2011, Richard Black and colleagues, and it was published in Global Environmental Change. Let me zoom in a little bit and first look at the decision, right? So this is all about households' decisions, whether or not to move or to stay. And of course, as migration researchers, you all know there's a whole bunch of different factors we know shape migration probability: political factors, economic factors, social factors. what this framework did was really integrate environmental factors, which was pretty new in a conceptual framework. You can see it over there on the left-hand side of the screen. And in addition to being a direct influence on migration, which is what that particular box represents, also an indirect influence. So you can think about the ways that the environment reshapes economic drivers, for example, hurricanes or typhoons impacting labor demand and labor supply. So as opposed to being the direct driver, also having really important indirect influences as well. And of course, this useful framework included micro characteristics that we know shape migration, in addition to those meso level characteristics. So that has been a conceptual framework. Again, that was put out 2011, so a decade ago, and it's been used quite a lot, really useful in thinking about the various factors that shape migration and the ways in which environment might intersect with those. So let me move now to remaining puzzles, and I pulled out a few. I'll go through each quickly. Immobility and mobility, some different socioeconomic variations in the migration environment connection, thresholds, migration within a portfolio, and connections to policy questions. So first, the idea of immobility and mobility. I think in the early years, right, we assumed migration would be a sought after adaptation strategy, but work is really suggesting that a lot of people want to stay. This is Helen Adams' work that was published in Population and Environment. And she did a really neat job sort of thinking about the various reasons that people might want to stay in place. So individuals in the middle of that decision, she used some behavioral psychology work as background as well, might be satisfied with their place and not want to move. They may have, and if they don't want to move, they may have insufficient resources to do so. But there are other reasons, right? They might be positively attached to place, for example. So really sort of thinking about the reasons why people might not want to move instead of assuming that movement is necessarily the desirable option. This is a piece that I recently published with colleagues in Pop and Environment again that looks at sort of a two-way intersection producing four different alternatives. So we think about vulnerability. We also think about this migration continuum. And, you know, when you think about movement or mobility, you can have voluntary mobility, where migration is perhaps an adaptation to climate pressures, but also involuntary mobility, hurricane displacement, for example. When you have immobility and people don't move, that can be voluntary, right? They've decided to try some other adaptation strategies, but that immobility can also be involuntary if people are trapped in place because they simply don't have the resources to engage migration as an adaptive strategy. So I think that immobility, mobility, is an area where we need to do a lot more work. And it is coming, which I think is very exciting. The second puzzle, some under-examined socioeconomic differentials. And here I'll highlight gender. You know, for a few years now, there have been calls to do more work on gender, and it hasn't really emerged. So I'm excited to see some of the examples that are coming forward. These are just two pieces that you might find interesting. The first one is more of a conceptual piece and really talks about the need to think about gender roles within the household and the ways in which those shape individuals' ability to even engage in migration as a strategy. And then a recent piece on gender, environment, and migration in Bangladesh that does look at some of those distinctions. And I just want to really encourage the community to keep thinking along those lines. Another puzzle I see is related to threshold. So this is a piece by McClellan just a couple of years ago, again in Population and Environment. And he has this graphic. Let me just quickly walk you through. So imagine households have this existing, land uses, their livelihood. It might be going okay in the box one, no additional adaptation needed. Maybe things get a little challenged, right? You see severity of the hazard on the y-axis and adaptation is necessary, but then maybe no longer successful. So they move to an alternative, right? That's working okay for a while, but then maybe something else, and then it's no longer successful, and then we see migration. So the question here would be, what is the threshold at which households engage in that next option? And we don't have a whole lot of work on that. One example where they did do that is this paper, which was on Mexico, published in Climatic Change, looked at sort of cumulative hazard exposure and modeled when it was that households finally engaged that decision to migrate. So just an example of how that might work. Another puzzle is, how does migration fit within the livelihood portfolios? Migration isn't only the only option. So thinking about it as related to other options is important. And then the last puzzle I'll mention is, how do we better link our scholarship to the questions that really need answered by policymakers? This isn't a realm in which I work a lot, the policy realm. I'd love to do more. Maybe some of you know how we might better connect our work to particular policy needs. So I'll quickly run through some promising approaches, 3 different ones. First, I like the fact that several meta-analyses and different syntheses are coming forward. I'm putting forward 3 right here, examples from just 2020. So just 2020, a piece by Roman Hoffman in Nature Climate Change showed up in 2020. I can't remember the number of studies they looked at. Here's another one that was in Review of Environmental Economics and Policy, Human Migration in the Era of Climate Change, and then yet another one that showed up this year in Climatic Change as well. So I like these, and I think they're useful because they help us sort of, it's a ground check, right? Ground truth. So I also think promising is extensions to theory. And this is actually a paper that I'm writing with a graduate student of mine, Dan Simon. I'm really excited about it. I'm having a little trouble getting it published. But the idea here is, thinking about the ways in which we might integrate environment into migration theory more regularly. So I think that's really important. And I hope someday you'll see it in print. So then the other promising area is advancements in research methods. So this is a brand new piece, again, in the American Journal of Sociology on climate change and migration. And they used an agent-based model. And I'm sure that some of you have done that kind of work. But they were able to tap into long-standing research in this study site in Thailand to parameterize a model and think about the ways in which the various pieces of it intersect to shape the probability of both out-migration and return migration. And I think application of those creative methods is really exciting. And this last piece I put up because they used qualitative methods, and I think there is a tremendous amount of space in this migration climate literature to think about what we can learn qualitatively from actually talking with people instead of using only quantitative data. And I think there's a lot of room for growth there too. So let me conclude simply by saying substantial progress has been made. Congratulations to the research community. We do have more to do, and I'm really excited to hear these next presentations because I'm sure that they're going to be part of that advancement. So again, thank you so much. Merci beaucoup for the invitation, and I look forward to the rest of the session.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you very much for this inspiring presentation. So we will have a session of Q&A at the end. Do not hesitate to ask questions in the chat, and then we will all come back and we'll answer the questions.